In this video we're going to talk about setting properties in code. Up to now we've used the property window in order to set properties. So for example, whenever we drag and drop the text box onto our form designer, what we could do is actually set the default text here in the text box by typing in the word Bob, for example. And notice when we do that we get a preview of what it will look like when the application actually does run here in our visual designer. So let's go ahead and run the application, and you'll notice that the property is set at what is called design time, which means while we were designing the application, while we were in the visual designer, we could actually change the property of the text box. Also, we were able to change its position by dragging it and dropping it into place in this particular location within the form. So there's a lot that we can do to design our forms and build our applications only using the visual designer and the properties box during design time. But in this video I'm also going to show you how you can set the property of text or any property of any control or the form itself at what's called runtime by changing the value in code. So let's do this. Let's drag and drop a button onto our surface here, and whenever somebody clicks this button, so let's double click it and get to our event that we saw in the last video, what we're going to do is change this value from Bob to, let's say, Steve, for example. So the way we're going to do this is actually reference the name of our text box. Don't remember the name of your text box? That's fine. Just go back over to your designer and select it, and you can see its name right here, text box 1. Now we could change the name of that text box to anything we want to. Let's, for example, let's change its name to something a little more friendly, txt name. And that should be a familiar concept to you from watching the previous videos. So now let's type in txt name in the button 1 underscore click event dot, and notice when I hit the dot that we get a window that pops up. I'll talk about that in just a moment. But for right now, let's just set the text property of our text box equal to Steve. So when somebody clicks our button, we'll fire off this code that sets the name of the text box equal to Steve, or rather the text value, the text property of the text box to Steve. So let's go ahead and run it. So by default it says Bob, but let me click it and notice that it changed to Steve. So just to recap, we not only can set properties at design time by changing the properties in the properties window, but we also change them at runtime by setting the properties in code. Additionally, we can get properties from code. So let's go ahead and do that. Before we actually change the name, I'm going to pop up a message box. Message box.show, and what we'll do is display the current name that's in the text box. So we'll do this, txt name.text. That's all we need to do. So let's go ahead and run it now. This is getting the value. When we change the value, it's setting the value. So let's go ahead and click it. We got the value Bob from our txt name.text property, and we displayed it in a message box, and then we set the value of txt name.text to Steve. So that's the difference between getting and setting a property. Okay, so there's two more things I want to talk about. Did you remember when we typed in the period or the dot? Notice that we get this little pop-up window. This is actually called IntelliSense, and this gives us all of the various properties and even methods, but we won't talk about those just now. The properties that we can change in code. So say, for example, we want to change the back color of the text box, and we want to set it equal to color.beige. We can do that. Let's set one more property, name dot, and I can just use my down arrow keys, or I can use my mouse to scroll through all the items here and look at all of them. They're in alphabetical order, and the ones with little fingers over a little box, that means that it's a property. The little red boxes mean that they are methods, and we're not going to use those just yet. We will soon. So let's continue to scroll down and take a look at all the various items here. And so let's do this. Let's set the left. This sets where the control will actually appear on the screen. Equals 100. That means 100 pixels into the screen will adjust the position, and let's see how this works. Let's go ahead and click it, get our message box, and notice that the background turned beige, and also the box moved over to 100 pixels from the edge, or from the left-hand side of the form. So we can do a lot of different things to our controls. We can adjust them in a lot of different ways at runtime using code. And so if you were to position the text box in code, not only would you need the left property, but you'll also need the top property as well. So top is the property that you're looking for to adjust how far it is from the top. And you'll also need to adjust perhaps the width property of the control. And so you'll need some of that information as you begin to work through the exercise for this lesson, which I really encourage you to do, even though it's really hard. Oh yeah, one last thing as well. I wanted to also show you what happens if now we change our mind and say we want to change the name of our control from txt name to txt first name. So I set it here in my properties window. What do you suppose will happen? Let's go ahead and take a look at the code. I get this little blue squiggly line underneath every reference to txt name. Why does that happen? It happens because we changed the name of the control, and so this word that referred to our control is no longer valid. So VisualStudio.net does not change this for you automatically. You'll need to go through and change each instance. Because if you don't, let's go ahead and try to run the application without changing these last two instances. There were build errors. Continue. Click no. It tells you the name txt name is not declared. And so when we double click that, it shows us the places where we need to fix the problem before we can actually try to run the application again. So that should just about do it. Thank you.